So, it's the same routine as previously. I'll start with some questions for Tobin, and then I'll open it up to all of you. My good friend Ben will be running with the mic. Please put your hand in the air. We don't want to miss anybody. If you have a question, don't be shy. We'll get to you, and we'll try and get the answer to you. Tobin, what point were you at in your career when this series of movies and this character came to you? What point were you at in your career when this character and these movies came to you?
It's an interesting, can you hear me okay back there? Yeah, good. You can never tell where something is going to lead. So if you have an opportunity to do something in your life, I would recommend that you say yes, if you can. I've made probably 150 different films and television shows, and I had just finished a TV series when Saw came along, and it had the attractive aspect of being shot in Los Angeles. I only had to work a series of, the shoot was an 18-day shoot. We shot it in downtown LA, and the film starred Danny Glover, who I had never worked with, and also when I read the script, it had a marvelous ending that I did not anticipate. So that's why I did Saw at that particular point in time. I kind of sandwiched it in between two jobs, and then I moved on with no thought of what was going to happen when it opened. It was a little independent film that was shot for $1 million and brought here from Australia by two young guys with a 10-minute short. One of those young guys is James Wan. And then Lee Wanell, who was the other guy, acted in the film. He was one of the two guys in the bathroom of the film. So it was one of those things that none of us were thinking about Saw becoming what it became. We simply got in there for 18 days and had some fun on a very small set in a very dilapidated old building in downtown LA.
How much is an actor's voice an integral part of an actor's toolbox?
Well, it's one of your tools. It's something that, you know, the voice that I use on those tape recordings in Saw came about. I had used it before, but not really consciously. I've played a lot of edgy guys, from cowboys to mafia guys to, you know, tough guys. I played a lot of edgy guys, so I dropped down into that voice every once in a while, you know. And I had played a guy. I played in a TV series about 6 months before Saw. I played Patrick Dempsey's father on a TV series called Once and Again. And you never saw me. In other words, you saw Patrick. Oh, Patrick was psychotic in the series. And all these voices kept coming into his head. And I was hired to play his father. And I wore a hat and an overcoat. And they shot me. So when Patrick would have a psychotic attack, these voices would come into his head, and you would see me in shadow behind him, and his father would say to him something like, you're nothing. You've never been anything, and you never will be anything. That kind of thing. So the woman who cast Once and Again ultimately cast Saw. And when she saw the script of Saw, she thought, oh, I got to bring Tobin to James Wan. So I went and met with James Wan, and it was the voice that I used in Once and Again as Patrick Dempsey's father that we ultimately changed slightly and we used in the tape recordings.
When it came to shooting the film, I'm assuming that you recorded your audio separately and then you're in the studio separately. Is that correct?
Yes. When we were shooting the scenes in the bathroom, the tape recordings are picked up by Carrie Elways or Lee 1L, and when they play the tape recording, then I would come back into the bathroom if I wasn't already there. In other words, I was always in the bathroom on the floor if you saw me. If you didn't see me and they were shooting just Carrie or they were shooting just Lee, I didn't have to be there. So very often they would not see me when the tape recordings were going off. So I would just stand there and I would read the tape recording. And frankly, we hadn't really decided on a voice. So I would read the tape recordings, and then after, in post-production, I would go into the studio and record those tapes down in that register down there.
So the intonation, the creation, the construction of that character by voice was entirely you?
It was entirely just spur of the moment. I had sat and talked with James, and that was about it. We hadn't really talked much about the tapes, so when it came time to shoot those scenes, James said, Tobin, would you come in and read the tapes? So they'll read the script. So I would come into the bathroom and I would read what was in the script that was on the tape. And he liked what we did, so we kept it. So when I went in post-production into the studio, we just kept that voice.
When you talk about creating the character in the Patrick Dempsey show, is it always about... I'm losing myself in my own question. I shall come to the audience and come back to my question. Question over here, and I'll rethink it.
So far away.
Hi.
It's okay, you're on.
Is it? Oh yeah. Sorry. Such an idiot. Hi. Going back to the voice, like when I watched the Saw films back to back for the first time, how do I put it? Your voice had a huge impact.
Just hold it up. Hold it up.
Your voice had such a huge impact on me when you're talking as Jigsaw, not so much John Kramer. You can feel everything you're saying. You can You can empathize with you so much based on your voice alone. So when I watch the movies and you're feeling so much emotion and there's so much character development and there's so much story, does it bother you that some people call it mindless gore for the sake of gore when there's so much more to it than that?
Yes. No, it doesn't bother me because the people, first of all, horror people don't take the films that seriously. I mean, they're affected by them, they're moved by them, they like them, they watch them repeatedly, they have questions about them. It's part of their world. The people who are most offended by the Saw films don't go to see them. And so that's my, why it doesn't concern me. I'm much more concerned about the real violence in the world than I am about the imaginary violence that happens in Saw films. So the people that are most troubled by the films or the people who speak out most loudly about that they're crap, you know, that they're pornography or whatever is it called, some kind of
Torture porn.
torture porn, yeah. I haven't seen the films and don't understand what horror is all about.
When we were talking earlier on, and I was asking about being a horror icon and everything, there's also this discussion that people have or have had over the years that the English make better villains and actors like to play villains and you all want to wear the black hat, etc. You alluded to this earlier by playing edgy characters. How many real villains have you played in your career? Is this the top of the list, or have there been others as well?
Oh no, I played a lot of villains. I would recommend that you watch The Firm with Tom Cruise and Gene Hackman, Holly Hunter. The music is by Dave Grusin. Marvelous film that stands up. We shot it in 1986, directed by Sidney Pollack. 1993. Fabulous film. So see that. I played a lot of, in quotes, villains in my career. You know, villains are, it's all in the writing. Villains are just people like everyone else, and if you have opportunities to develop them, you can do amazing things. I would recommend you look at a film called Executioner's Song, where Tommy Lee Jones plays Gary Gilmore, who ultimately was executed in Utah. By the end of Executioner's Song, which is a novel written by Norman Mailer, you understand how Gary Gilmore grew up. You understand how his mother felt about him. So bad guys they're just human beings, and very often bad guys don't look at themselves as bad guys. A lot of bad guys look at themselves as left out, you know, ignored. So, and by the way, I don't know about the best villains being British, but I became a British citizen last year. And my roots are deeply in this country, so maybe that has something to do with it.
You're channeling your inner Brit. Okay, questions. Do we have questions?
Please throw your hands up in the air.
One here, yeah.
Don't wave them around like you just don't care.
Hiya. Sorry about that. You said you don't think like English people make like the best villains, but who would you consider the best villain in films? Like one example.
My friend here said he thinks the best villains are British, are often British, and I understand what he means because Gothic stemmed from Britain, and so the history of horror and scary movies and is often rooted in this country. The best villains that I can think of are people who can bring more to the character than one dimension, because that's what's most interesting. I'll just pull somebody out. Tony Soprano in The Sopranos. I mean, if you don't develop, if they don't need me, the script is inexorably going to carry me toward performing the acts that I perform. They don't need me to do anything about that. They just need me to do it. Actors bring another dimension to a person, to an individual. And if even for a moment you're sitting there watching that film and you go, oh, I get that. Or, oh, I never thought of that. Like John Kramer says in Saw 2, he says, detective, if you knew the exact moment of your own death, how would that change how you live your life? Now that's a fascinating question. If you knew you had 12 days left, would that change what you're doing with your 12 days? Probably would. So if it makes the audience think, if it moves the audience, but if you're all one dimension, just bad, 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 that's not right. It's not what human beings are. They're more than one thing. So the best villains are the ones who are multidimensional.
Just over here.
Hi. I just wanted to know who comes up with the games and the traps and whether the cast and the crew have any input on that.
Which games and traps, I think she was asking. Are your
Who
favourite?
comes up with them and whether the cast and the crew have any input.
Sorry. Who comes up with all the games and the traps for the films? Are the cast ever involved?
Oh, no, not the cast. Very often the producers, set designers, in the early development of the script, they're talking to special effects people. They're saying, we're thinking we'd like to do something like this. And so the special effects people, there's a guy up in Toronto, Canada. His name is Francois Degenard. He's a marvelous artist, extremely creative. I will witness Saw 3, the refrigerator woman. She's naked in a room, and if she behaves in a certain way, she gets another layer of ice on her. These sprayers go off, and how they created that I watched them do it. It was just marvelous. So there are people who making films is a group effort, and there are people who are specifically charged with creating those traps and suggesting ideas, and they go back and forth between, oh, we wanted to do this, but what if we did this instead? Oh, we can't do that because the set limits us, because of this. So there's a lot of changes that go on, there's a lot of discussion that goes on, and you put a bunch of twisted people in a room, they'll come up with something, as you've seen in the 8 Saw films.
Hi. Touching on what you were saying before, there's a quote that is like, there is no such thing as good or evil in the world. It is just people doing what they think is right. And with John Kramer, Jigsaw, him having his cancer diagnosis, blah, 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 it gave him almost nothing left to lose. But there's so much depth and backstory to the character. How much input do you guys have in that?
Is it dead? Don't know, swap. Easy.
Start again. Right, okay. So start again. There's a quote that says there's no such thing as good or evil in the world, just people doing what they think is right. John Kramer, obviously, like with his story,
I'll stop you right there. There is evil in the world, and I don't agree with that quote.
Understood.
Things are not either this or the other extreme. Yes, I understand that some bad people don't view themselves as bad, but rather will rationalize what they do and have a reason for what they do. But evil does exist in the world, and evil loves it if you ignore it, and we need to face evil. So I just wanted to stop you on that to say I don't agree with that quote.
Fair enough. Although, going off that though, could you see what Jigsaw did, what John Kramer did as evil?
Do I see it as evil? Would I do it? I can only answer that by saying, would I do it myself? No, I wouldn't. there would be other ways of dealing with that. But it's a movie, you know, and it's a horror movie. But it's not my job. It's not my job to make a judgment about John Kramer. It's your job. As you see what he does, you decide, is this right? Is it justified? What might be the result? All I can do is stay on his side. If you don't agree with that or with him, then you'll sit there for an hour and a half and you'll make that decision, as we all have to make decisions about what we see people do, whether they're small people or sitting in the White House.
But basically, there is a lot of depth to the character, and how much are you saying about the fact that you guys had quite a bit of input into that? How much did you have in the input to his backstory?
A lot in terms of his dialogue. John was designed by James Wan and Lee Wanell in Australia. They came here with a 10-minute short. Some of the concepts that are in Saw 1 about appreciating your life, about the treatment of the terminally ill by the medical community. See, that's what's interesting about Saw. That's why people like Saw, because the very question, do you agree with him? Would you do that? The job is to raise that question in your mind, not for me to answer it. And one of the best ways for me to raise that question in your mind is to make him more fully human, so that you see that evil can exist, even on the most human levels. I would also say, even as evil exists, I see him a man who's committed to dealing with those guys on Wall Street who stole all that money from those people in 2008, you know, or people like that. Somebody who's dealing with things and not waiting for someone else to fix it. So good and bad, it's about the gray areas in between. It's not a simple, it's more complex than is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? And that's the kind of world that we're living in now.
You're damn right. Okay, over here, yeah.
Hello. Hiya, Tobin. I'd just like to know, I'd like to say you're an amazing actor. However, I'd like to know what you'd do for an occupation if you wasn't an actor.
I'd be a teacher.
Can I ask why?
Because I love children.
Oh, that's so cute. Love it.
Okay, we're about at the end of our session. I'm going to wrap it up in the audience. Wrap it up in the audience.
Do you want the good one back?
I'll take the good one back.
Yeah. I'll take the bad guy.
Thank you. Tobin, it's been an absolute privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
Clearly, there's a great deal more to this character than meets the eye. The complexity of the movies, the intricacy of the scripts, the depth of the characterizations. As you've gone through the movies, as you've evolved this character, how far have you gone with him, and do you feel not empathy but sympathy for John Kramer?
Oh yeah, you have a man who's living on a frontier by himself. It's like he's on the moon, alone. So that's another part of him and his world.
Check 1, 2.
That's pretty affecting, because all of us know what it feels like to be alone.
1, 2.
And to be lonely,
Check.
you know.
1, 2, 2, 2.
And to be unsure. And to be frightened.
Check 1, 2.
So, John Kramer, the most important part of John Kramer for me has been his size. As far as I'm concerned, John Kramer has the scope of King Lear. You could go, there's so far that you could go with him. And I don't believe that we have fully told his story. And I hope we have an opportunity to do that.
So do I. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tobin Bell.